Hi guys, I'm going to talk about constipation today. First, I'm going to define constipation and detail its consequences. Then I will review the four major causes of constipation and their impact. Finally, I provide you with solutions. Do you know what the most important job for an optimal balance of our society is? The garbage collector. If you have no garbage collector, or if you are on strike, the waste will stack up and quite quickly you'll have a multiplication of parasites, microorganisms, bacteria, fungus, larvae, rats and vermin, because they have access to food in abundance. So garbage collectors are important. And so today I wanted to talk to you about constipation. I know it's not glamorous. We live in a time where there is a lot of reluctance to talk about excretions, urine and stools. We just don't talk about it. It directly influences our health though. But it's clear that a huge proportion of people is constipated. It's painful, but nobody talks much about it. Constipation is one of the symptoms that reflects the most the state of health of someone. Constipation is not a disease per se. It's a consequence of a dysfunction of the body. Because the body properly functioning is not constipated. So constipation basically starts as soon as you have less than one stool per meal. 3 meals a day should mean 3 stools per day. You're skeptical, right? Well, it's not because most people only have 1 stool per day or even 1 stool every 2 to 4 days that it is normal. When you take 1 meal, that meal is called a food bowl. Once the digestive process in the stomach is over, that bowl moves into the pylorus and starts circulating in the small intestine, the colon, then to the rectum, and is finally flushed through the anus. Normally, it should cover that distance alone without being agglomerated to other meals. Constipation occurs as soon as you have 2 meals that are agglomerated together. Let me repeat this. Constipation occurs as soon as you have 2 meals that are agglomerated together. Constipation is a symptom, but we have a lot of consequences. Constipation means less circulation of the stool in the digestive tract, which means that the products will stay longer. And if they stay longer waiting, then sugars start to ferment, which induces a production of gas and alcohol and a proliferation of microorganisms. Those microorganisms arrive because their job is to eat the sugar. But in the meantime, they also poo, reject waste called metabolites. So, eventually, we have 3 types of products directly connected with constipation and weak circulation of complex sugar. We'll get back to complex sugar in a bit. We have gas, alcohol, and metabolite from microorganisms. Those metabolites are toxic and acidic. For instance, uric acid and sulfuric acid, generated by the metabolism of Candida albicans, are both poisons and neurotoxins. Another job of the stools is to take away the waste generated around the mucous membrane of the colon. That membrane works essentially in elimination mode and little in absorption. It rejects in the digestive tract a lot of toxic products. Stool function is to take them away. If that cleansing happens 3 times a day, then you can imagine that there will be 3 times more products flushed away than someone who would only have a bowel movement once a day. So, what happens if that waste released from the colon is not flushed away? Well, that waste also rots, putrefies, produces alcohol, generates a proliferation of bacteria, and that waste can also be reabsorbed inside the body because, like a new mucous membrane, it also works a bit in absorption. Now, why are we constipated? What's the reason for constipation? Well, there are multiple causes, but the first one is tiredness, exhaustion. Yes, our modern food diet is inappropriate, and we'll get back to that in a moment, and generates a lot of symptoms we call disease. But you can give the best food ever to someone whose sympathetic nervous system is exhausted, you won't have many results. When your system is exhausted, your body saves up on vital energy and prioritizes where to use that energy. Now, in your intestines, you have what is called a propulsive peristaltic wave, and that wave is what makes the food bowl move. Have you ever seen a worm or even a shongololo moving? A centipede, if you prefer. So you got the idea, right? The propulsive peristaltic wave generates the same type of movement with the food bowl inside the intestine in order to make it move. And anything related to muscle contraction in your body depends on the ability of your nervous system to contract those muscles. The propulsive peristaltic wave is connected to the strength of the autonomous nervous system, and more specifically, the parasympathetic nervous system. We've already explained in our various YouTube videos the difference between the two aspects of the autonomous nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system kicks in case of an emergency. When you have a stimulation, a stress to which you need to adapt. As for the parasympathetic nervous system, it allows to relax and calm down and is directly connected to sleep, digestion, assimilation, etc. And so, to the propulsive peristaltic wave. Nowadays, many people are subject to repetitive stress, which induces a hyperactivity of the sympathetic nervous system, which means, in return, an underfunctioning of the parasympathetic nervous system. Those people have a weak digestion, they have a poor functioning of the propulsive peristaltic wave, and they develop constipation. When they overexert their sympathetic nervous system, after some time, there is no response anymore because the adrenal glands are totally exhausted. But in the meantime, the parasympathetic nervous system also becomes exhausted. At that point, the accumulation of material in the intestines is so big that there is little circulation of the waste. What makes the football still move is that it gathers with other footballs, and by doing so, they become a burden, a discomfort for our digestive system. The system then reacts by pushing that food no matter what, but there is no propulsive peristaltic wave any longer, and our stool moves at a slower pace than what it should do. So, what are the consequences? Well, let's imagine your garbage collector. Instead of collecting 3 times a day, imagine that garbage collector only collects every 3 to 4 days. Well, what's going to happen? The garbage at your door piles up, and after a few days, you have parasites, bacteria, larvae, midges, and flies. It's exactly the same thing in our body. Since your stools don't move much, they rot. Microorganisms multiply to eat, and they also poo. All of this generates toxic products that you are going to absorb through your intestine mucous membrane. Have you ever had a tape wall? This is due to rotting. When you have sticky matter in your intestines, if you have matter that doesn't move, even if you have a bowel movement once a day, you still have sticky matter there. Some people have only a bowel movement once every 3 days. And when they do, well, you could expect their stools to be massive, but nope. It is just average, normal. That's weird because they didn't fast in between, right? So there's a big problem. They've lost some of the weight, some on the way out. Some of that putrid matter stayed inside, stuck in the folds and crevices of the bowel. It generates a proliferation of parasites that eat some of it, but again, those parasites also poo inside and produce metabolites. It's a vicious circle that generates endotoxemia or self-intoxication, same thing. And that's more product our body has to evacuate in addition to what we eat and the natural metabolism of our cells. It means that the overexit doors of our body, kidneys for instance, are going to have more work. More work for the emunctories means even more work for an already drained nervous system. Do you get the full picture of this dead loop. Basically, the less progression of the stools in the intestines, the more toxicity. And the more toxicity, the more work for the already exhausted nervous system in its attempt to flush the waste. The more attempts for the worn out nervous system, the more it wears itself out, and the more it wears itself out, the less the circulation of the stools. The less the circulation of the stool, the more self-intoxication, and the more self-intoxication, the more attempts from the exhausted nervous system to flush out. The loop is complete. Understand that because of those toxic products in your blood, your system is constantly working, which means it is constantly exhausted. Okay, so what do we do with that? We have to start somewhere, right? In this big picture I've drawn, we don't know if it is endotoxemia that generates an overload of the internal environment and exhausted, or if it is the exhaustion of the internal environment that slows down the tools and generates endotoxemia. We don't know how it started. Both may have started at the same time, and anyway, it's irrelevant. Still, there is one factor you can play up with, and that's your propulsive peristaltic wave. The first thing to do is to unblock all of these to flush out the matter. Using plant mix is a great way to start. Not purgative or laxative plants though. Instead, choose plant that will help circulating the stool in order for that matter not to stagnate. The idea is to activate the propulsive peristaltic wave again, and for this to happen, a maximum amount of matter needs to be removed from the walls of your intestines. That crust of feces needs to be removed, and plants can help with that. The objective is not to have diarrhea, but rather to have regular stools back. You can also use psyllium. You may have heard of it. It's the bark of a little plant. It's come from South America. It thickens in water and creates what is called mucilage. You want to eat that mucilage liquid enough, not too thick, to avoid creating a blockage. That mucilage is going to mechanically sweep your inner walls, and little by little it will detach the depositions. Those depositions can also be in the form of a crust. That's why having a cold pressed juice is very important. Juices contain water and minerals to effectively rehydrate. The reason why food dries out and hardens in the intestine is because it's demineralized. So you have plants, psyllium and juices. That's the best way to relaunch the propulsive peristaltic wave and make sure that rotting is minimal in your intestines. And that's when you start recovering, because you're tired, exhausted, you're pale, you crawl, you have a depressive mood sometimes, you feel angst. Let's start with having the garbage collector coming several times a day. There is no way around it to stop spending energy you shouldn't be spending. That saved energy can then be used for recovery. So, stress followed by exhaustion of the nervous system is the first cause of constipation. Now, let's move on to the second reason for constipation. It is directly connected to our food diet. We eat a cooked food diet that is generally dehydrated. There is not enough water, and you need water to have a proper circulation of the matter inside the intestines. That's why people who massively adopt a food diet based on raw fruits and vegetables with a bit of good fat are their constipation issue regulated and automatically sorted for most of them. And this is because cooking is first and foremost a dehydration process, except steam cooking, right? Cooking also brings a modification of the fibers. You need water and fibers to flush your intestines. Those fibers constitute the bulk material, the heavy part of the feces. And some of those fibers will feed the bacteria of the intestines. Now, that feeding of the intestines bacteria facilitates the propulsive peristaltic way. Assimilation, digestion, constipation and circulation of the stool is therefore nervous because connected to the nervous system, and bacterial because connected to the work of bacteria. And so we need to feed those bacteria properly. And to do so, you give them great quantities of mineral salts, water, and high quality fibers. But cooking denatures fibers. For instance, dietary fibers in raw versus in cooked cabbage are not in the same form and are not going to be equally effective in sweeping the intestines. So, we said the cause of constipation are exhaustion, dehydration, and lack of fibers. We have to add that to that list the third cause of constipation, which is the overconsumption of complex sugars, also called slow sugars. They are long chains of sugars. The thing is, our body only knows how to deal with simple sugars. It uses some sort of little scissors called digestive enzymes. But we only have a certain amount, and our body can only produce a certain amount at the same time. The omnipresence of complex sugars in our food diet is one of the main traits of our modern civilization since the end of the Second World War. The massification of the use of complex sugars, the use of cereals everywhere in our food, characterizes our dietary habits. The trouble is, we don't have the enzymes capital to digest those complex sugars. So what happens is that those complex sugars stagnate in the intestine, since they can be assimilated, because they have not been broken down properly. Stagnation generates fermentation. Fermentation triggers the apparition of microorganism population, and those microorganisms will generate metabolite products that will prevent the action of the propulsive peristaltic wave and will be responsible for constipation. Complex sugar products are therefore a major cause of constipation. Those non-digested complex sugars will behave like a glue. They will stick to the walls of the intestines, generate fermentation, production of alcohol, bacteria proliferation, which will all interfere with the action of the propulsive peristaltic wave. So, what do we have? We have fatigue, dehydration, lack of fibers, and complex sugar. These are the traits of our time. Fatigue and exhaustion are basically everywhere. Dehydration also means demineralization, which means acidification. These three always go together. Lack of fibers is due to our very much processed food diet, in which the fibers of fruits and vegetables have been deeply modified by various processes. They've lost their natural qualities and are not useful anymore. Finally, the infamous complex sugars are everywhere. Wheat, corn, and other cereals are just everywhere in our food. You cannot find a recipe without complex sugars somewhere. The trouble is, we are not equipped for them. We are not equipped to break down such big and complex chains of sugars. These are indeed products that humans can eat. But we've never wondered whether they were appropriate for us. Let me give you an example. Cows can eat animal meals, but we do know that eventually they will develop the Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. But we fail to draw the parallel with humans. We can see there are more and more organic and psychological dysfunctions and civilization diseases. But we don't make the link between the two. Finally, and that's the fourth reason for constipation, we are all born unequal in terms of digestive capital. Some people are born with a strong digestive system. We call them 4x4 at Regenesis. Paula has taken this example many times. And some other are born with a weak digestive capital, the small and simple car. These people should definitely eat much more living foods, as we've explained, and stay away from complex sugars. But even so, they may still need some help with their transit by taking herbal tea supplements. Let's get back to that in a bit. So, what is the solution to constipation? Well, I've given you some keys for case number 1, which is exhaustion, and cases number 4, which is the digestive capital. But overall, it cannot go without a change of lifestyle. Constipation is a manifestation of our unhealthy lifestyle. It will generate many consequences. gas and flatulence, you can probably live with it. But the alcohol from the intestines, I doubt it. It goes into the bloodstream, impacts the functioning of our liver, and more than anything, it has a massive neuropsychic impact that will get you to live in a permanent brain fog. Other consequences are digestive difficulties, bloating, and mental disorders. The walls of your intestines are covered with a layer of filth and non-digested complex sugars, and as a result won't work properly to assimilate the nutrients, which means you have a very poor ability to convert food into energy. It is your goal, guys. I don't think so. So how do we change that? Well, first, by changing your lifestyle. Constipation is the symptom of a lifestyle that is not suitable for you. Taking pills and drugs won't change anything. Let me take for you an example. If you're suddenly catapulted in an atmosphere without oxygen, you will suffocate, right? You are not going to look for a pill that will bring you a bit of oxygen, correct? You will just want to be in an atmosphere meant for life. Likewise, if you're in a place where the temperature, let's say, is 80 degrees centigrade, you're not going to look for a fan or an air system. You will want to get the hell out of it. Well, my friends, this is exactly the same. Constipation is just a manifestation, same as neurodegenerative disease, cancer, asthma, autoimmune disease, etc. They are all symptoms. Symptoms that we haven't respected the laws of a living. We haven't respected the needs of our body. Especially if you have a small and simple car, you can't bypass those laws. If you have a machine and don't respect the operating instructions, you cannot expect it to work properly, right? It's the same for us. Yet, we are living beings and we have something more. Even if you haven't respected the operating instructions for years, if you suddenly start respecting them, guess what? What has been damaged will be fixed. And that's the beauty of the living. So gradually, and at your own pace, adapt your lifestyle based on what we've seen so far. Rest more and do everything you can to limit stress in order to repair your nervous system. Bring more fibers by abundantly eating raw fruits and vegetables. Bring more water and minerals with cold-pressed juices. In the next live, I'll give you a cold-pressed juice recipe for constipation. Consume psyllium, as it is a great regulator of the intestine function. The mucilage of psyllium acts like a sponge in the intestines. It humidifies the stools all the way through the exit door. And thanks to its fibers, it increases the size of the stool. As soon as that size increases, the size of the intestine increases as well, and the sensors in the intestines will send a signal that stimulates the propulsive peristaltic wave. Consume also medicine plants. You can find plant mixes at your nearest herbalist or online. Be cautious with laxative plants though. Instead, go for the plants that will favor the propulsive peristaltic wave, that are astringent and will help remove the impurities stuck in the diverticulum, the little pockets that form in the intestine when the tissues are too weak. If you do all this, constipation will gradually go away. This is true for cause number 1, exhaustion, remember, as well as the other causes mentioned. Now, to soothe and ease, you can also use an enema bag to help drain the colon, or even do a colon hydrotherapy. That way you're preventing fermentation and stagnation that will lead to proliferation of microorganisms. But this is a temporary solution. It won't heal the root cause of constipation. And don't do this if your system is exhausted, because it may exhaust your system even more. Oh, and one last thing. We've never been shown how to defecate. We've been told that we need to sit down, so we sit down and we wait. We even have magazines in the toilets while we wait. But if you have time to read magazines, it's the proof that the propulsive peristaltic wave doesn't work properly. Being seated is the worst position to defecate. The best position is squatted. In many countries around the world, you have squat toilets. They are the best to properly poo. And this is because in that position, you have an alignment that allows a full draining of the intestines. So, if you want to do something good for your intestines, go for a squatting position. And if you can't squat on your toilets, use a little stepper or anything that will raise your legs. That's the best thing you can do for your intestines, even if you're not constipated. To conclude this slide, constipation is not the problem per se. Those who made the necessary changes to their lifestyle can testify that it's gone. The limiting factors are tiredness and a weak digestive system per se. Adapting your food diet is doable, even though there may be a bit of challenge sometimes, and at Regenesis we can help. We can help you make that move smoothly, but exhaustion requires more time. Bear in mind that the main problem is stagnation. When you have stagnation, you have fermentation, etc. It poisons you the same way as withholding your emotions and feelings poison you. Instead, there should be a flow of emotions, feelings, food, etc. They should all freely travel. We forget that waste disposal is the most essential function of our physiology, as well as for our society. It is time for you to stop clogging the flow of life in your system and let it go. It will ease all the regulating functions and trigger homeostasis in your body at physical, psychological, and emotional levels. You can check our YouTube channel to watch our video on homeostasis. It's called How to Make Sure Your Body is Working Towards Health. Stop using laxative substances to stop constipation. It simply inflames your intestines. Stop thinking it's normal to go to the stool every other day and start working on the source of your constipation by changing your lifestyle. Now it's time for me to go. Have a great day. See you all. Bye bye, guys.